Let's just go back to the top story with Tamsin there that broke just an hour or so ago, that Liz Truss spent £500,000, not of her money, of your money, flying by private jet to Australia. Now, this wasn't a long time ago. This was the last few days, at a time when the government, the cabinet she sits in, is in trouble because the guy who is the Queen's First Minister doesn't live as you live. He has cakes, he has parties, he has Don't You Want Me Baby pumping out on the hi-fi. And so the issue before the government's in trouble because our rulers do not live as the people they rule are forced to do. And so Liz Truss, who's being touted as, we need to get rid of Boris Johnson so we can put Liz Truss in as Prime Minister instead. Liz Truss has just flown to Australia on a £500,000 private plane. No one knows who she is. Doesn't matter whether she's flying to Australia. Doesn't matter whether she's flying to Papua New Guinea. Doesn't matter whether she's flying to Newcastle. No one knows who 99.99% of the population of Papua New Guinea, Australia or Newcastle wouldn't recognise this woman. It's absolutely ridiculous that at a time when the issue before the people is that those who rule us do not feel bound to live as we do. And so we're going to get rid of Boris Johnson, party boy, cake boy, and replace Boris with £500,000 private flight girl. Yeah, that really makes a lot of sense. You know, I mentioned the other day on this show that I thought it'd be a good idea, and it's perfectly possible, perfectly legal, because wherever you live in Her Majesty's dominions, you are entitled to sit in what we used to call the Imperial Parliament. And my suggestion was that Tony Abbott, the Australian Prime Minister, should run for the leadership of the UK Tory party. And I'll tell you one reason I like Tony Abbott is because when he was Prime Minister, he booked a skiing holiday in the French Alps. And he took a flight from Sydney to Geneva. That's a long flight. The Prime Minister of Australia flew economy class. He was back there in row 237F. And the only reason we know about this is because the bloke in 237G, or whatever it was tweeting, I didn't get a wink of sleep last night. That Prime Minister, Tony Abbott, sitting next to me, kept yakking all night. But no, that's Tony Abbott. And that's why I'd rather he was the next leader of the UK Tory party than somebody who doesn't get it like Liz Truss. And I know the Tories are the stupid party. That's what they're always called. But there's a limit even to Tory stupidity. How could she think? There's no security reason for sending Liz Truss on a £500,000 flight. Nobody knows who she is and what's she going to do. Reveal the plans that she's coming up with to liberate Kiev after Putin takes it. It's ridiculous. Okay, I'm going to calm down. Going to have a few pills and a nice cup of herbal tea and lie down in a dark. I can't. I got to do a show. Okay, let's take a brisk tour d'horizon before we return to these islands. Back in the twilight of the Soviet Union, as you may recall, the old joke was that in Moscow supermarkets, every checkout line was for 9 items or less. Under bare shelves Biden and his supply chain disruptions, that joke has come to every American supermarket too. But they're not quite empty enough. You can still find the occasional can of generic brand cat food to get grandma through the weekend. So bare shelves Biden and Canada's 12-year-old Prime Minister Jacinda Trudeau decided to tighten the screws by imposing mandatory vaccination for cross-border truckers. In consequence, an estimated 10% of North American trucks are now sitting idle, so Grandma will have to stretch that can of Whiskers out for a fortnight. And as we mentioned earlier this week. This is really the most inspirational story of the week. A huge chunk of the rest of those trucks have formed a massive protest convoy that's due to converge on Ottawa this weekend. That's how it looked. I think that's in Thunder Bay. Anyway, this convoy is now over 50 miles long, and it's broken the record for the world's longest truck convoy. And even in the remotest rural areas, as you can see there are ordinary citizens lining the streets to cheer the convoy as it passes. They were out in Dryden, Ontario, population 7,000, and a huge proportion of that 7,000 were out there to cheer them. Now, lining the streets, as you'll know if you've been to Canada in January, lining the streets is not generally a popular or prudent thing to do in the frozen north. The midday high of in Dryden, Ontario, the midday high was zero. That's zero. And that's Fahrenheit, so it's minus 17 Celsius or centigrade. Actually, I'm not going to bother with Celsius. We should have dropped centigrade after Brexit. I'm just dropping a hint to our weather guys here. We should have dropped centigrade and Celsius after Brexit, because real men shiver in Fahrenheit. But these crowds are not there only in what passes for the midday sun in frosty Ontario, but they're there in the even more frigid night hours too, loosing off fireworks as the truckers pass by. And while they're standing there loosing, I know you can get a bit of heat from the fireworks if you accidentally loosen up your trouser leg, but that's a nighttime low of minus 11 Fahrenheit. And they're cheering those truckers on their way. The city of Ottawa is preparing to cut the live stream of its municipal traffic cameras as the truckers approach, so that they can go full Baghdad Bob on Canadians. There's no truth to rumours that the infidel truckers have taken the airport. These are just scurrilous lies. As for the Prime Minister of Canada, he says opinions contrary to the received wisdom of the beneficent, all-powerful state have no place in today's society.
The small fringe minority of people who are on their way to Ottawa or who are holding unacceptable views that they're expressing do not represent the views of Canadians who have been there for each other, who know that following the science and stepping up to protect each other is the best way to continue to ensure our freedoms, our rights, our values as a country.
Next question.
So these views are not, quote, acceptable. Today, Justin Trudeau, entirely by coincidence, announced he'd been exposed to the COVID, so he's having to isolate until these truckers leave town, along with most of the cabinet. This is the most boosted cabinet, even in the Western world. I don't know what they're up to now. They're on to their 5th or 6th jab. They all lie around in cabinet meetings, semi-naked, jabbing each other all day long, and it still doesn't prevent them coming down with the thing. So he's having to isolate. Are there any other parties in Canada? Well, the leader of Her Majesty's loyal opposition, a hollow nothing of a man called Erin O'Toole, has certainly taken the, quote, acceptability of the truckers' views to heart. He refuses to say whether he supports those guys or not. Indeed, he refuses to disagree with Justin Trudeau on anything, no matter how low Trudeau's numbers go. He is such a loyal opposition, he refuses to provide any opposition. He's like one of those backing singers who never gets to do anything but repeat the line the stars just sung in the fills. That is the short history of most of the Western world these last 2 years. Any alternative to COVID without end got shoved in the freezer circa March 2020, and there it stayed. Doesn't really matter whether nominal Conservatives are in power, as they are in London and Canberra. They're not doing anything Conservative. Scott Morrison down under is going to the country in the next 2 or 3 months. He may yet eke out a victory, but he hasn't done a single thing to deserve it. Meanwhile, from the rubble, not just of the economy, but of life, the wretched, pitiful final days of our elders, denied something as basic as the company of loved ones, the reduction of millions of children to confused, miserable, fearful creatures. From the rubble of our societies, what emerges? Bare shelves Biden has just begun shipping free masks to American households. The masks are made in, oh, go on, take a wild guess. Yes, made in China. Justin Trudeau wants everyone to get jabbed once every quarter, once every month, once every fortnight, whatever it takes. The syringes for those jabs are made in China. So China gets you coming and going. It makes the virus that totals the world, and it makes the masks and syringes that supposedly save you from the virus. Way back in March 2020, the PPE we didn't have enough of was made in China because it caught us by surprise. Whereas, unsurprisingly, Chairman Xi had apparently prepared for an increased demand in PPE from around the world. But we're about to begin our 3rd year on a so-called war footing, and the so-called superpower still has to import its masks from the perpetrator. Meanwhile, the tough guys in Washington threaten China over Taiwan and Russia over Ukraine. Dream on, you losers. China makes everything you need. And while it's true you can upturn every item in your home and not find anything with the Made in Russia label other than the vodka bottle, Joe Biden's America is now importing more crude oil from Russia than it does from Saudi Arabia, over 11% of total US energy imports. Why? Because America's woke anti-energy left is down on domestic energy production, whether fracking, coal, the Keystone Pipeline. It feels much more virtuous to shut down the local coal mine and bulk up Putin's retirement account. Where do you think he got the money to put 130,000 troops on the Ukrainian border? The laughably misnamed free world is killing itself. After 2 years of the Great Reset, China is richer, Russia is bolder, America is weaker, and in Britain, Canada, Australia, Europe, millions and millions of people are poorer and sicker and have ever less freedom of movement, freedom of association, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, or even the freedom to retain your job. Chinese virus, Chinese mask, Chinese syringe, and Chinese freedoms. What do you make of all this? Should we be demanding reparations from Chairman Xi? Or should we be busting out of this? Should we be like whatever season that was of Dallas, where the plot had so jumped the tracks that at the end, Bobby Ewing stepped into the shower and they just went back 2 years to before all the craziness begins? Do we need Bobby Ewing to step into the shower and turn the clock back to 2019?